December 16th, 1985. At 5:16 in the evening, Midtown Manhattan, East 46th Street, outside Sparks Steakhouse. Paul Castellano stepped out of his black Lincoln Town car. He took 3 steps toward the restaurant entrance. 4 men in trench coats and fur hats were waiting on the sidewalk. They opened fire. 6 bullets hit Castellano, 4 hit his bodyguard, Thomas Bilotti. Both men were dead before they reached the pavement. Castellano was the boss of the Gambino crime family, the most powerful organized crime operation in the United States. He had controlled 500 soldiers and over 1,000 associates. He had commanded an empire worth an estimated $500 million a year. He had been handpicked for the job by one man, his brother-in-law Carlo Gambino, the quiet don who had ruled the American Mafia for nearly 2 decades. Minutes after the shooting, a car pulled up to the scene. Inside was Thomas Gambino, Carlo's eldest son. He saw his uncle's body on the sidewalk. He was turned away by the men who had ordered the hit. But the bullets that killed Paul Castellano did more than end a boss. They severed the last direct link between Carlo Gambino's bloodline and the throne he had built. Carlo had 4 children, 3 sons, and a daughter. One would build a $75 million fortune and go to federal prison. One would spend decades in the shadow of the family name without ever being formally inducted into the life. One would marry a doctor and disappear from the underworld entirely. And one would choose silence so total that almost nothing is known about him at all. This is what happened to Carlo Gambino's family, and why their story reveals that in this life, blood ties can mean loyalty or liability. Carlo Gambino was born on August 24, 1902, in Palermo, Sicily. He came from a family with established ties to the Sicilian Mafia. His father and an uncle were both connected men. In 1921, at the age of 19, he stowed away on a steamship called the Vincenzo Florio, bound for Norfolk, Virginia, entering the United States illegally. He made his way to Brooklyn, where a growing network of Sicilian immigrants were already building the foundations of what would become the American Cosa Nostra. He rose through the ranks during the Castellano-Marese War of 1930 and 1931, the bloody power struggle that reshaped the New York Mafia. He survived by choosing the winning side, aligning with Salvatore Maranzano first, and then shifting loyalty to Lucky Luciano when the tide turned. It was a pattern that would define his entire career. Carlo Gambino never led from the front. He watched, he waited, and he moved only when the moment was right. For the next 2 decades, he worked his way upward through the family, then led by Vincent Mangano, and later by Albert Anastasia. Anastasia was volatile, paranoid, and prone to ordering murders on a whim. He had helped run Murder, Inc., and he had earned the nickname the Mad Hatter for his unpredictable temper. On October 25, 1957, 2 gunmen walked into the barbershop of the Park Sheraton Hotel in Manhattan and shot Anastasia dead while he sat in the barber's chair, his face covered in a hot towel. Carlo Gambino had helped arrange the hit. He took control of the family immediately afterward and never let go. From 1957 to 1976, Carlo Gambino was arguably the most powerful organized crime figure in American history. He controlled labor unions across the Eastern Seaboard, the Teamsters, the longshoremen, and the construction trades. He ran the waterfront and took a cut of every container that moved through the ports of New York and New Jersey. He controlled garbage hauling in much of the metropolitan area, a racket that generated millions in guaranteed revenue year after year. He ran loan sharking operations that charged debtors interest rates of 1 to 5% per week. He oversaw gambling networks, numbers rackets, sports betting, and illegal card games that pulled in cash from every borough. His captains ran hijacking crews that stole millions in merchandise from trucks and cargo shipments at Kennedy Airport. Despite publicly banning narcotics trafficking, law enforcement believed that members of his family were involved in the heroin trade, generating enormous profits while Carlo maintained plausible deniability. His influence reached into politics, law enforcement, and legitimate business. He had judges who owed him favors. He had union officials who answered directly to his captains. He had police detectives and FBI agents who were compromised. His estimated annual revenue reached $500 million, and yet he operated with a restraint that baffled investigators. He was small in stature, soft-spoken, and lived in a modest two-story home at 2230 Ocean Parkway in the Gravesend neighborhood of Brooklyn. During 2 years of FBI surveillance in the early 1960s, agents recording his conversations captured him saying just 2 words at one sit-down meeting: frog legs. He ordered his dinner and said nothing else. He rarely raised his voice. He never flaunted his wealth. He wore plain suits and walked his neighborhood like any other aging Italian grandfather. And in his entire criminal career spanning more than 5 decades, he served only 22 months in prison for a 1937 tax evasion conviction. That was it. No other charges ever stuck. Carlo married his first cousin, Catherine Castellano, on December 5, 1926, at St. Rosalia's Church in Brooklyn. This was not just a marriage, it was an alliance. Catherine was the sister of Paul Castellano, linking the 2 men by both blood and marriage. It meant Carlo and Paul were simultaneously cousins and brothers-in-law, a bond that would determine the fate of the entire family for decades to come. Together, Carlo and Catherine had 4 children. Their eldest, a daughter named Phyllis, was born in 1927. Thomas followed in 1929. Joseph came in 1936. Their youngest son, Carlo Jr., was born sometime in the mid-1930s to mid-1940s. Sources conflict on the exact year, and the family has never publicly clarified. The Gambino children grew up in a household where the money came from crime, but the daily routines looked ordinary. Carlo insisted on family dinners. He attended Sunday gatherings and walked Catherine to church. The children were educated. Thomas graduated from Manhattan College with a degree in business. They were comfortable. The family owned a summer home in Massapequa, Long Island, in addition to the Brooklyn residence. But they were not entirely shielded from what their father was. Thomas, in particular, was groomed for involvement from an early age. He was introduced to made men and associates. He learned how the money was made. He understood the unwritten rules. And when Carlo needed his eldest son to make a strategic marriage that would cement an alliance with another powerful crime family, Thomas obeyed without question. Catherine Gambino died on August 6, 1971, after a long illness. She was in her early 60s. Carlo was devastated. His own health had already begun to decline. He had suffered a serious coronary in 1970, and the years of stress were catching up with him. He spent his final years stepping back from some day-to-day operations, though he never fully relinquished control. He was consumed with one question above all others: what would happen to his children once he was gone? But this life built on blood money had a fatal weakness. Carlo Gambino understood something most mob bosses refuse to accept. The mafia is not a monarchy. He could not simply hand the throne to his sons. His children lacked the reputation for ruthlessness that commanding 500 hardened criminals required. They were earners, not killers. Passing the family to Thomas or Joseph would have been seen as nepotism of the worst kind, and it would have invited mutiny from captains who had spent decades earning their positions through blood. So, Carlo made a different choice. He named Paul Castellano, his wife's brother, his cousin, his most trusted relative, as his successor. The plan was elegant in its simplicity. Castellano would protect the Gambino bloodline from the inside. He would keep Thomas and Joseph safe, keep them earning, and keep the family's wealth intact while shielding them from the worst of the violence. Carlo believed that blood would hold. He was wrong. On October 15, 1976, Carlo Gambino sat in his Massapequa, Long Island, summer home watching the New York Yankees beat the Kansas City Royals to win the American League pennant. That evening, he suffered a fatal coronary. He was 74 years old. His funeral was held at the Church of Our Lady of Grace in the Gravesend section of Brooklyn, and several hundred mourners attended. He was buried in a $7,000 bronze coffin at St. John's Cemetery in Middle Village, Queens. The newspapers called him the boss of bosses. The FBI considered him the most powerful mafia figure of his generation, and his 4 children were left to navigate a world their father had built, but could no longer protect them in. Paul Castellano took the reins of the Gambino family and ran it like a corporate executive. He moved into a palatial 17-room mansion on Todd Hill in Staten Island, the highest point on the eastern seaboard south of Maine, a property that cost over $300,000 and became known within mafia circles as the White House. He installed a swimming pool, a formal dining room, and a conference room where he held meetings like a Fortune 500 CEO. He wore tailored suits. He dined at the finest restaurants. He favored white-collar crime, stock fraud, construction bid rigging, labor racketeering, concrete monopolies, over-the-street-level drug dealing, and violence that the family's lower ranks depended on for survival. He was making the Gambino family richer than ever, but he was also alienating the soldiers and street captains who did the dirty work and saw little of the profits. And he kept Thomas Gambino closer than almost anyone else in the organization. Castellano elevated Thomas to capo, giving him his own crew and his own territory. According to law enforcement sources, Castellano reportedly intended to name Thomas as acting boss if Castellano was ever convicted and sent to prison. It was the next best thing to inheriting the throne directly. Thomas would not be boss in name, but he would run operations while his uncle served time. Under Castellano's umbrella of protection, Thomas expanded his garment district operations, made strategic investments, and built his personal fortune into the tens of millions. Joseph, too, benefited from the arrangement, serving as the operational backbone of the trucking enterprise. Even Phyllis and Carlo Jr., who stayed away from the criminal side, enjoyed the security that came with having the boss of the most powerful crime family in America as their uncle. The arrangement Carlo had designed was working exactly as planned. His children were safe, wealthy, and protected. But inside the family, resentment festered. Carlo's choice of Castellano over longtime underboss Aniello Neil Della Croce had never been accepted by the family's blue-collar faction. Della Croce was old school, a street boss who believed in the traditions of violence and loyalty that had built the mafia. His protege was a brash, ambitious crew leader from Howard Beach, Queens, named John Gotti. Gotti was running a multi-million-dollar heroin operation in direct violation of Castellano's ban on drug trafficking. When Della Croce died of lung cancer on December 2, 1985, the last buffer between Gotti's faction and Castellano dissolved overnight. Castellano compounded the situation by failing to attend Della Croce's wake, an insult so grave that it sealed his fate. 14 days later, he was dead on the pavement outside Sparks. Thomas Gambino arrived at the scene within minutes. He saw what had happened. He recognized the men involved. And in that moment, standing near his uncle's blood on East 46th Street, he made the same kind of calculated decision his father had made dozens of times throughout his career. He swallowed his loyalty. He swallowed his grief. And he pledged allegiance to John Gotti. Thomas understood that survival in this world meant knowing when to fight and when to bend. He bent. Gotti, for his part, recognized Thomas's extraordinary value as an earner. FBI wiretaps captured Gotti, calling Thomas a sweetheart and expressing a desire to beef up his regime. The Gambino bloodline still carried weight. The name opened doors, commanded respect, and generated enormous revenue. But the bloodline no longer sat on the throne. From that night forward, Carlo Gambino's children were employees in someone else's empire. They answered to John Gotti, a man their father would never have trusted with the keys to the family. The shift in power had immediate consequences. Under Carlo and Castellano, the Gambino sons had operated with a degree of autonomy and protection that shielded them from the most dangerous aspects of the life. Under Gotti, that protection was conditional. It depended entirely on their ability to keep earning. As long as the money flowed upward, they were safe. If it stopped, they were expendable. Thomas understood this equation perfectly. He kept his head down, kept his trucking operation running, and sent his tribute up the chain. But the safety net his father had spent decades building, the network of blood ties and family loyalty that was supposed to protect the Gambino children forever, was gone. Castellano's body wasn't even cold before the rules changed. Thomas Gambino was the eldest son, and he was the one who went furthest into the life. His father had been the boss. His father-in-law was a boss. Thomas built an enterprise that generated tens of millions of dollars a year, all while maintaining the outward appearance of a legitimate businessman. In 1962, Thomas married Frances Lucchese, the daughter of Gaetano "Tommy" Lucchese, the boss of the Lucchese crime family. The wedding was an event. Over 1,000 guests attended. Carlo Gambino reportedly presented Tommy Lucchese with a gift of $30,000. The marriage was personal, but it was also a strategic merger between two of New York's 5 families. It gave the Gambinos access to Lucchese-controlled rackets at John F. Kennedy International Airport and cemented a partnership that would endure for decades. Thomas was now connected to two of the most powerful organized crime operations in the country, one by birth, one by marriage. Thomas leveraged those connections into something remarkable, near total control of New York City's garment district trucking. Through companies like Consolidated Carriers Corporation, he and his brother Joseph came to dominate the movement of goods in and out of Manhattan's garment center, which at the time was the largest manufacturing hub for clothing in the United States. By the 1980s, the Gambino brothers controlled an estimated 80 to 90% of all garment district trucking. Every designer, every manufacturer, every fabric supplier who needed to move product in or out of the district had to use a Gambino-connected truck. There was no alternative. The operation imposed a 5 to 7% surcharge on all goods, a mob tax that was invisible to consumers but devastating to businesses. Their trucking rates were roughly 40% higher than what legitimate non-mob connected competitors would have charged. The brothers grossed approximately $70 million and collected an estimated $22 million in profits. In 1981, the garment industry named Thomas Gambino its Man of the Year. The irony was lost on no one, except perhaps Thomas himself. Manhattan, District Attorney Robert Morgenthau had been building a case against the Gambino trucking operation for years. The investigation was led in part by a young prosecutor named Eliot Spitzer, who would later become governor of New York before his own spectacular fall from grace. Undercover New York State police officers posed as garment manufacturers, recorded conversations with Gambino associates, and documented the mechanics of the extortion scheme in granular detail. In 1992, Morgenthau's office indicted Thomas and Joseph Gambino on enterprise corruption charges. If convicted, they faced 25 years to life in prison. Thomas was terrified. Prosecutors later described his terrifying fear of prison as the primary factor in what happened next. Mid-trial, in February of 1992, both brothers accepted a plea agreement. They pleaded guilty to a state antitrust charge, a far lesser offense than the enterprise corruption charges they had been facing. They paid $12 million in combined fines and restitution. They agreed to sell all of their trucking companies and more than 400 trucks, and they accepted a permanent ban from the garment district trucking industry. In exchange, they received no prison time. Thomas walked out of the courtroom and told reporters he felt completely vindicated. Prosecutors saw it very differently. They had dismantled a monopoly worth tens of millions of dollars and permanently removed the Gambino name from the garment district. But they also knew that the brothers still had their fortune. $12 million was a fraction of what they had earned. The law was not finished with Thomas. Federal prosecutors in Connecticut had been building a separate case against him for running illegal gambling and loan sharking operations stretching back to 1985. The government's star witness was Salvatore "Sammy" the Bull Gravano, John Gotti's former underboss, who had turned government informant in 1991 and was now testifying against virtually every major figure in the Gambino organization. Gravano's testimony was devastating. He provided first-hand accounts of Thomas's involvement in criminal operations that the state case had not touched. On May 11, 1993, Thomas Gambino was convicted on 2 counts of federal racketeering. He was sentenced to 5 years in federal prison. He He reported to begin his sentence in January of 1996, and he was released on May 10, 2000. He was 70 years old when he walked out. After his release, Thomas relocated to Florida and lived quietly. His personal wealth at the time of his 1992 plea had been estimated at $75 million in cash, bonds, and blue-chip stocks. A fortune accumulated over decades of criminal enterprise and, according to investigators, laundered through layers of legitimate investments. He maintained a residence on Manhattan's Upper East Side and owned property at Lido Beach, Long Island, a home purchased in 2004 for $950,000 that was later valued at approximately $1.27 million. He also held real estate in Florida. Despite his criminal record, Thomas was never placed under any form of supervised release that restricted his movements after completing his federal sentence. He and Frances had 4 children: Thomas Jr., Carl, Mary, and Kathy. Thomas Jr., born around 1963, would have been in his early 60s by the time of his father's death. The children grew up during the height of their father's power, attending private schools and living in upper-class neighborhoods, while their father controlled the trucking routes for one of the largest manufacturing districts in the Western Hemisphere. By the time Thomas Sr. emerged from prison, his children were middle-aged adults with families of their own. At the time of his death, Thomas had 8 grandchildren and 1 great-grandchild. None of them had any documented involvement in organized crime. The Gambino grandchildren grew up in a fundamentally different world than the one their grandfather Carlo had built, a world of charity galas and hospital dedications rather than sit-downs and tribute payments. Thomas Gambino died on October 3, 2023, at the age of 94. He was buried at St. John's Cemetery in Queens, the same cemetery where his father, his mother, his sister, and his brother Carlo Jr. are all interred. The man once called the Mafia Prince had outlived virtually every major figure from his father's era. He outlived Gotti. He outlived Gravano's relevance. He outlived the world that had made him. Joseph Gambino was the middle son, and his entire life was shaped by a single deliberate choice. He stayed one step removed. Unlike Thomas, who was formally inducted as a made member of the Gambino crime family and elevated to capo, Joseph was never made. He operated as an associate, connected, trusted, profitable, and deeply embedded in the family's business operations, but without the formal oath of omerta that full membership required. The distinction may have been strategic. By remaining an associate rather than a soldier, Joseph maintained a degree of legal and organizational separation from the family's most violent activities. In practice, that separation was paper-thin. Joseph served as the top operating officer of the Garment District trucking monopoly. He managed the daily logistics while Thomas handled the broader strategy and high-level relationships. He dealt with manufacturers. He dealt with problems. An undercover state police officer recorded Joseph saying, "We don't call the police. We take care of it ourselves." He lived inside the world his father built. He spoke its language. He enforced its rules. He profited from its crimes. But on paper, he was never officially one of them. Joseph accepted the same 1992 plea deal as his brother, guilty pleas to antitrust charges, $12 million in combined fines, and a permanent ban from Garment District trucking. But unlike Thomas, Joseph was not subsequently charged in the Connecticut racketeering case. He avoided federal prison entirely. After the plea, he faded from public view. No further arrests, no further indictments, no further headlines. Joseph Gambino died on February 20th, 2020, at the age of 83. His death received minimal public attention. He had spent the last 28 years of his life outside the reach of law enforcement, a quiet ending for a man who had once helped run a multi-million-dollar criminal enterprise. It is worth noting that a separate individual, Giuseppe Joe Gambino, known as the Cherry Hill Gambino, was a distant relative of Carlo's who was heavily involved in Sicilian heroin trafficking and was arrested in 1988 during Operation Iron Tower. He is frequently confused with Carlo's son Joseph in press accounts, but they were entirely separate people. Phyllis Gambino was the eldest of Carlo's 4 children and the only daughter. Her story is the cleanest break in the family, a straight line away from the underworld, drawn early and maintained for a lifetime. Phyllis married Dr. Thomas Sinatra, a physician with no connection to singer Frank Sinatra despite the identical surname. The coincidence of the name attracted occasional curiosity, but there was no relation. The marriage placed Phyllis firmly in the legitimate world, the world of medical practices and parent-teacher meetings, not sit-downs and envelope drops. She lived in Queens. She raised 4 children, Nina, Frank, Carla, and Catherine. She attended church. She did not appear in court records. She did not appear in FBI surveillance logs. She did not make headlines. She was never questioned by federal investigators in connection with any of her family's criminal activities, and if she was, no record of it has surfaced. In a family where the name Gambino triggered instant recognition and constant scrutiny from law enforcement and the media, Phyllis achieved something none of her brothers could: genuine, lasting anonymity. While Thomas was being named Man of the Year by the garment industry and dodging federal prosecutors, while Joseph was being recorded by undercover officers, while the Gambino name made front pages across the country, Phyllis lived a life that could have belonged to any upper-middle-class Italian-American woman in Queens. She attended her parents' funerals. She maintained relationships with her brothers, but she never crossed the line into their world. Her daughter Catherine died in 1999 under circumstances that were not widely reported. Phyllis herself died in 2007, reportedly from complications related to Alzheimer's disease. She was approximately 80 years old. She was buried at St. John's Cemetery alongside her parents. The contrast between Phyllis and her eldest brother Thomas could not be sharper. Same father, same household, same last name. Thomas built a criminal empire, married a mob boss's daughter, and went to federal prison. Phyllis married a doctor, raised her children, and lived a life so quiet it barely left a mark on the public record. Carlo Gambino Jr. is the most obscure of Carlo's 4 children, a man who carried the most famous surname in American organized crime history and managed to leave almost no public footprint whatsoever. His exact birth year is disputed, with some sources placing it in the mid-1930s and others in the mid-1940s, and the family has never publicly clarified the discrepancy. Even the basic facts of his life are difficult to pin down, which may be exactly how he wanted it. He married a woman named Carmela Zuccarello. He has no documented criminal record, no arrests, no indictments, and no convictions. He did not appear in federal court filings related to the Gambino crime family. He was not mentioned in FBI surveillance reports that have been made public. He was not referenced in any of the major books written about the Gambino organization. He was not named in Sammy Gravano's extensive testimony. He was not quoted in newspaper articles. He did not attend the public events or social gatherings where other members of the Gambino extended family were photographed. He lived so far beneath public notice that even researchers who have spent decades studying the Gambino family have acknowledged they know almost nothing about him. This absence is itself remarkable. Thomas and Joseph were publicly identified as members of the Gambino organization from the 1970s onward. Their names appeared in law enforcement reports, court documents, and news coverage for decades. Phyllis, while not involved in crime, was known to investigators as Carlo's daughter, but Carlo Jr. seems to have slipped through every net. Whether this was a deliberate strategy, a conscious decision to sever any connection to the family business, or simply a reflection of a quiet personality that never sought attention, the result was the same. He lived and died in something very close to total anonymity. Carlo Jr. died in 2019. His death received no significant media coverage. He was buried at St. John's Cemetery in Queens, the same family plot that now holds 4 generations of Gambinos. In a world that consumed and destroyed so many of the people who carried the Gambino name, Carlo Jr.'s greatest achievement may have been his ability to simply live an unremarkable life. In 1990, while Thomas was still fighting the Garment District indictment that threatened to send him to prison for the rest of his life, he and his wife Frances made an unusual move. They established the Gambino Medical and Science Foundation, a charitable organization dedicated to funding medical research and pediatric care. The timing was notable. Whether the foundation was motivated by genuine philanthropy, a desire to improve public perception before trial, or some combination of the two, the money it directed toward hospitals was real and substantial. The foundation donated $2.5 million to Long Island Jewish Medical Center to build a pediatric bone marrow transplant unit. It created the Francis and Thomas Gambino Professorship in Pediatric Hematology Oncology, an endowed academic position at a major medical institution, funded by the son of Carlo Gambino. It supported stem cell transplant research, purchased equipment for trauma centers, and funded epilepsy treatment programs across the New York metropolitan area. Thomas and Francis's children, Thomas Jr., Carl, Mary, and Kathy, became active participants in the foundation's ongoing work, organizing annual holiday events for hospitalized children at Cohen Children's Medical Center in Queens, and maintaining the family's relationship with the Northwell Health Hospital system. The foundation is still active. The Gambino grandchildren carry no criminal records. They appear in no law enforcement databases. Their most visible public activity is raising money for children's hospitals. Frances Gambino, Thomas's widow, was reportedly living on Manhattan's Upper East Side at the time of his death in 2023, at approximately 92 years of age. The Gambino crime family, meanwhile, still operates under Carlo's name, but it has no connection to his blood. In November of 2023, the same month Thomas was buried, federal prosecutors indicted 16 members of the organization, including Captain Joseph Lonnie, known as Joe Brooklyn, on racketeering and extortion charges. In June of 2024, another indictment charged 17 members with running an illegal gambling operation that took in $22.7 million, and with running a loan sharking ring that moved $500,000 a week. Not one of the defendants in either case shared a drop of blood with Carlo Gambino. The crime family that still carries his name is run by men he never met, collecting money from rackets he never authorized, answering to bosses who never sat across the table from the quiet old man in the Brooklyn kitchen. His grandchildren throw holiday parties for sick kids. His crime family runs gambling rings. The name on the indictments and the name on the charity foundation checks is the same. Everything else has changed. And somewhere in St. John's Cemetery in Queens, in a family plot that now holds a father, a mother, a daughter, and 2 sons, the headstones stand close together, closer than the lives they lived ever were.